We ready?
Okay,
Okay.
give it a go, yeah.
I'm Liam Kelly from the Institute of Asian Studies at University Brunei Darussalam, and today I'm talking with Stephen Druce, assistant professor in the Academy of Brunei Studies, and we're going to talk about his research and look at some of the big topics in Southeast Asian studies and history, such as the Mandala. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks, Steve, for sitting down and talking. Oh, okay, let me do it again. Always so serious. We don't have to be so serious, okay? Okay, thanks, Steve, for sitting down and talking with us. Over the course of the past year, you've given 2 Wednesday seminars to the Institute of Asian Studies. One on Islam in Makassar and among the Bugis, and then one more recently on the Mandala, where you deconstructed that important concept in Southeast Asian studies to some extent. And so I guess a good way to start would be to ask you to talk a little bit about that last talk and what is the Mandala, what were you looking at, and what did you find?
Okay, well, it comes really from my work on the Bugis and Makassar kingdoms in South Sulawesi, looking at the development of complex society there. And the Mandela idea never seemed to make much sense there. I think in particular, the idea that kingdoms or early polities were the product of individuals, particularly as Walters puts it, these men of prowess, and that these sort of polities sort of were the sort of an extension of an individual, not a family group, and that lineage and didn't play any role in it, descent didn't play any role, but it was just individual men of prowess. That doesn't really make much sense in the context of South Sulawesi, where we find that from the very earliest development of kingdoms, very earliest sources, what we see is the importance of families, particularly high-status families. It's high-status families that lead agricultural expansions. There's never any question about the importance of one particular individual. Even rulers could be removed without affecting the stability of the kingdom as well.
Okay, so when I think of this concept of the Mandala, the one thing that I immediately think of is this idea that there's this sort of flexible or fluid power that extends out from a center, and then the peripheries either connect to it or they don't. Does that make sense in Sulawesi, or are you just critiquing this idea that at the center is this powerful individual rather than a family or something like that?
Okay, well, I think first I'll just explain about the structure. The South Sulawesi kingdoms, like the Mandela model, were highly decentralized. So the kingdoms themselves were made up of a numerous number of polities, could be 20, even 30 different polities. Each of them had their own individual rulers, and they each had their own domain, like a cluster of villages which formed that particular polity. So the reason why one polity may have become more important than the others is because they occupied the best agricultural land, they had access to trade routes and so forth. The reason why some of these polities became more important is because they did have control of the most productive agricultural land, which was the economic basis for the Bugis and Makassar kingdoms, or they had access to the main trade routes, main trade outlets with external traders. So these other tributary lands that became tributaries, that attached themselves to them, sometimes attached because of economic benefit, sometimes for protection against other polities, and sometimes through warfare as well, because one polity may have wanted to bring another polity under its control because it wanted access to its rice, which was the main export product for these kingdoms. But these kingdoms, or the polities within these kingdoms, remained independent polities or semi-independent polities right up until the 19th century. Each had their own ruler, their own laws, their own government as well.
So what about the leaders of these different polities? Is it, as I think in like the case of Thailand or Siam in the past, that some of the rulers of the surrounding polities were actually members of the same royal family. So they'd send out a prince to rule another or something.
Yeah, there was strategic marriage. You can see that. So that would help with the integration of a kingdom. So strategic marriage was an important way of developing cohesion between the kingdoms. But while the Mandela model always presents these polities as sort of an unstable circle of kings, they're highly fractured, they constantly fall, they last as long as they're men of prowess. That certainly wasn't the case in South Sulawesi. So we see a much greater level of stability. The central polity and the tributary lands attached to it often set out agreements, and we've got examples of these agreements.
Okay. But so these agreements would be not a contract, but what are they appealing to? Is it
so that they would almost work together?
I see.
But they would acknowledge the authority of this more important polity. But the important thing here is that these agreements were never made between two individuals. You never find it between the ruler of this place, the ruler of this place making an agreement. The agreement is always set out between the lands themselves. And it also invokes the ancestors and calls upon the future generations to maintain this relationship. So it's never about individuals. It's always about lands and families as well, high status families coming together sometimes,
Interesting. Okay, so there's something really there that gives it more longevity than
absolutely.
the charisma of a leader. I see.
Sometimes a tributary would break away from a kingdom, but that was generally because of warfare in another kingdom.
Right.
But when it did that, the tributary would then have another agreement, another oath with the new kingdom. It would revoke its old oath, and then a new one would be set out.
Okay.
I think it's also interesting to look at the idea of borders, because the Mandela model always tells us that there were never any fixed borders. But it's often talking about emerging polities, and of course that always seems to me to be an oxymoron, because emerging polities generally don't have fixed borders. But what we find in South Sulawesi is that each polity, and sometimes even villages, tended to have boundaries. And some of these are set out in texts, and sometimes there's conflict between boundaries as well. So while a kingdom, a polity wasn't necessarily demarcated in the modern sense, certainly the idea of boundaries and territory were very important in South Sulawesi. That may be because they're agricultural kingdoms, the land's much more valuable. Perhaps that wouldn't necessarily be the case in somewhere like Brunei, which is a maritime kingdom.
Right. Okay. In some ways, I remember talking to you about this and thinking that there were parallels perhaps between, say, South Sulawesi and the early lands that the Thai-speaking peoples went into, because you have this, you go into a mountain valley, you work it, and then someone moves to the next mountain valley. And so there could be something similar like that in terms of...
I think so, and I think in that you also emphasised that they were members of a family. And I think that's the important thing. It's families that we're talking about, not individuals.
Right. Yeah. But of course, there could be someone who's particularly charismatic within a family, right?
Sure.
But but then the family becomes the thing that holds it together over time, right? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and inherited status is very important as well.
So in that talk, you didn't completely deconstruct, but you pointed to aspects of this mandala model that need some rethinking. Last year, you gave a talk on Islam in South Sulawesi, and you had the word localization in the and I think the title, or it came up in the talk, and that is a concept that I'm always deconstructing with Vietnam because I don't know that it always works, but it works amazingly well, I think, in the South Sulawesi context. And perhaps you could say a little bit about Islam and localization and what you're looking at there.
Yeah, I can't remember that localization was in the title, but certainly you see this localization of Islamic ideas and certain interpretations of Sufi ideas, I think, in relation to gender in South Sulawesi. I think one of the things that started me off thinking about that was when I edited a special edition for a journal on South Sulawesi literature and history. And I edited a paper by Nur Hayati Rahman on this particular Malay text, which originally came from India, came to the Malays, and then came to the Bugis. And the Bugis completely adapted it to their own culture as well. So, for example, this particular text is about the adventures of a young prince. So the Bugis adapted it. So to be a young prince, this is about becoming an ideal man. Ibn al-Arabi's concept of the perfect man.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's sort of about that, and the Bugis adapt it. So, for example, the hero, which in the Bugis one is Indala Patara, in order to be the perfect man, the perfect Bugis man in Islamic concept, though he's an Islamic prince, he has to be a descendant of a Tomanorong, for example. So a Tomanorong is someone who descended from the upper world to sort of rule over the common people. He's white-blooded. So though it's a story about an Islamic prince, he still has to have this, the idea that he is descended from a Tomanorong.
Right. So you've told me that you're planning on looking further at Islam in the Bugis world. And, and so what is the plan for that?
The plan for that now is to organise an edited volume with Wahyuddin Halim, who's a friend of mine from Makassar. And we plan to produce a history of Bugis and Makassar Islam, beginning in the 17th century and going right up to the present.
Okay.
So we look at how some of these Austronesian concepts interact with Islam in the early period and continue to interact today. We'd also, of course, look at the changes that have gone through in development of modernist Islamic organisations, Bugis and Makassar Islam during the New Order period, bureaucratisation of Islam. We'd also go through and look at how the war on terror has affected Bugis and Makassar Islam, effects of ISIS today, and the different Islamic networks that the Bugis and Makassar are attached to, because Islam is also very diverse there. It has a very high number of members, so a very high number of people who are members of different Sufi brotherhoods. There's still people who practice Shia Islam there, and there's elements of Shia Islam that you find in different texts as well that go back some way. And then there's people who practice sort of a form of Islam mixed with indigenous beliefs. For example, the Tolatang Benteng, who are Muslims, but it's very different to the Islam practiced by most Bugis and Makassar.
Okay. So, we're talking about history and Islam in the past and things like that, as if this is something very easy to know, but a lot of this information that you're building your ideas are coming from texts that are in Bugis, correct?
Some of the ideas, yes. Yeah, some of the ideas are from Bugis texts.
Which not many people in the world read.
Not many,
right,
no,
okay.
no. But also a lot of oral information as
I
well.
see. Okay.
And I suppose years of being in South Sulawesi as well,
see.
picking up lots of information from different people, but oral traditions,
Okay.
Bugis texts as well. They're very important sources.
Okay, and I'm a little bit surprised that we don't have already a history of, say, Islam in the Bugis world. People have been working on it? Is that, and you want to create a more comprehensive examination of it, or?
Yeah, people have
Okay.
been working
Right.
on it, bits and pieces, but there hasn't been any comprehensive study
Okay.
of it. There's been a number of Bugis and Makassar students at the Australian National University in recent years
I see. Okay.
who have produced pretty good theses on various aspects of Islam
I see.
in South Sulawesi, so we'll certainly utilise those people.
Okay. Well, that looks like that should keep you busy for a while.
It will keep me busy for a while.
And maybe you can come back and give a Wednesday seminar on this topic sometime soon?
I'd love to. I'm always pleased to give a seminar at IAS.
Okay. So with that, I think I'll thank you for having this talk.
Okay.
And look forward to reading what you have to say about Islam in the Bugis world and hearing more talks at the Wednesday seminar at the Institute of Asian Studies.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.